It was the afternoon of November 15, 2001, in Austin, Texas, a place where the sun shines nearly 300 days a year. But this was not one of those days. Something ominous filled the air. Suddenly, the wind began to pick up. Ominous black clouds rolled in, completely blotting out the light. In an instant, day turned into night, and a torrential downpour unleashed, accompanied by deafening claps of thunder and blinding flashes of lightning. Such a storm hadn't been seen in Austin in at least 7 years. As if that wasn't enough, a tornado warning was issued, announcing its approach to the city. At the same time, in her cozy home office in the northwest suburbs, 43-year-old Diane Holik, a project manager at IBM, was working. When her friend warned her that a tornado was heading her way, Diane was terrified. Having grown up in New York, she had never experienced anything like it. Nevertheless, she reassured her friend that she wouldn't leave the house and that she would be fine. The storm raged and roared throughout the night. By morning, the rain had finally stopped pounding against the windows. The sky cleared and everything became eerily quiet. Residents rushed to contact their loved ones to check on how they had weathered the storm. But no one was able to reach Diane. Her friend and neighbor, Lackey Brown, a real estate agent, went to her house, but no one answered the door. By noon, a colleague from Dallas had called Diane 8 times. A video conference was scheduled at work, and Diane hadn't joined. Diane would never have reached such a high-ranking position without being a responsible person, so her colleague grew increasingly concerned that the tornado might have damaged her home or injured Diane. She contacted the police. Lackey Brown noticed the arrival of police officers and, since she had a key to the house, offered to let them in. The moment she stepped inside, a chill ran down her spine. Something was clearly wrong. The carpet showed signs that Diane's dogs hadn't been walked for a long time, something she would never have allowed. Lackey's instinct was correct. Upstairs in the guest bedroom, they discovered the lifeless body of the homeowner. Detectives from the homicide division immediately noticed that, compared to other crime scenes, this one was surprisingly clean. Everything was in its place, and one had to walk into the bedroom and even around the bed to spot the victim. Diane's body lay at an odd angle, as if someone had tried to hide it under the bed but failed. The doors were locked and the windows were undisturbed. Diane was fully clothed, with no signs of sexual assault. Moreover, she still wore some of her jewelry. The scene was so unusual that the detectives initially struggled to believe it was a murder. They speculated that Diane might have taken her own life, and that a friend or relative had found her, arranged her body in that position, and tidied up the house to shield her family from emotional trauma. However, a closer examination of the body revealed a far more horrifying reality. Diane's hands bore marks from zip ties, and her neck showed a deep ligature mark from strangulation. Near the bedroom, mascara and lipstick smudges were found on the carpet, and her cheek had an abrasion consistent with being dragged across the floor. This suggested that the killer, whoever they were, had restrained Diane with zip ties, strangled her near the bedroom, and then dragged her body into the room. Afterward, they meticulously cleaned the house. But one thing disrupted the immaculate scene: a towel left on a chair by the front door. Forensic experts took it for analysis, though they feared it might not be enough to lead them to the killer. When a beautiful woman is killed, investigations often begin by looking into the men close to her. With her enchanting smile and almost childlike openness, Diane Holik drew people to her like a magnet. She had many friends, both men and women, but Diane always valued her independence and self-sufficiency, avoiding overly serious relationships. However, after turning 40, Diane decided she wanted to get married and start a family like many of her friends. That's when she met Dennis Conley, a divorced father of 2 and a successful businessman who had recently relocated to Houston. He treated Diane like a queen, genuinely cared for her, and soon asked the question she had been dreaming of. Diane happily agreed to marry him and decided to sell her home to move to Houston. Diane enlisted the help of her friend, Lackey Brown, but the real estate market was struggling. On Friday, the day after Diane's murder, Dennis left her numerous messages. On one hand, it seemed like he was deeply concerned. On the other, could he have been creating an alibi for himself? After several unsuccessful attempts by police to contact Dennis, detectives began to wonder if he might be connected to the murder. Suspicion grew when they learned that one of the few missing items was Dennis's gift to Diane, a platinum ring worth $20,000. When police finally reached Dennis, he came to Austin immediately. He answered questions clearly and with apparent honesty. He admitted that he and Diane had experienced difficulties in their relationship because she was too independent. They had even decided to postpone the wedding, but they were seeing a couples counselor and had been resolving their issues. Dennis willingly provided fingerprints and a DNA sample. He stated that he had spoken to Diane on the phone the day of her murder, but had spent the evening in Houston. Dennis added that he couldn't think of anyone who might bear a grudge against Diane, but suggested the police talk to her colleague Ray, who had never hidden his feelings for her. Raphael Chauncey, or Ray, didn't need to be found. The worried colleague showed up at the crime scene on his own, claiming he couldn't reach Diane and had come to check on her. Detectives were immediately suspicious of how eager Ray was to assist the investigation. He seemed to go out of his way to be helpful. During questioning, Ray openly admitted that he was very fond of Diane, but she did not feel the same way. Diane had recently confided to a friend that she needed to create some distance between herself and Ray because his persistent attention was beginning to cross boundaries. Still, Diane saw Ray more often than her fiancé as they worked together. When she traveled, Ray even walked her dogs, which meant he had a key to her house. But Ray also had an alibi. On Thursday, the day of the murder, he was at work, and this was fully corroborated. Having ruled out one suspect, detectives turned their focus back to Diane's fiancé, especially after he did something unimaginable that alienated all of Diane's loved ones against him. While the investigation was ongoing, the day came to bid farewell to Diane. Her parents transported her body to New York. No one anticipated what would happen next. Dennis arrived accompanied by a priest and, without saying a word to anyone, conducted a wedding ceremony with the late Diane, placing a gold ring on her finger. Afterward, he didn't speak to any of Diane's relatives or friends present at the service. This enraged her parents, who removed the ring from their daughter's finger. They were furious, and Diane's friends became more convinced of Dennis's involvement in her murder. However, as bizarre as his actions seemed, Dennis was also proven innocent. His alibi was confirmed, showing he spent the day of the murder in Houston. The investigation hit a dead end until Diane's colleague provided a lead. She recalled Diane mentioning that she might have found a buyer for her house. Even if she had moved to Houston to join her fiancé, Diane still wanted to find a smaller home. So her house was still listed for sale on the day she died. Diane had told her colleague about a potential buyer who had visited her. He was dressed expensively and seemed harmless, so she wasn't afraid to let him in without a realtor. The man had sold a ranch and planned to pay Diane in cash from the sale proceeds. He promised to return later with his wife, assuring Diane that his wife would also love the house. Thus, the police had a new suspect. The question now was how to find him. Investigators theorized that the potential buyer might have visited other houses in the same area. They were right. About 7 women reported that, on the day of the murder, a man had come to see their homes, asking to view them without a realtor. When these witnesses were invited to the station and the women started entering one by one, the detectives were astonished. It was like a parade of very beautiful, similar-looking women of about the same age. It became clear that the suspect had a specific type and was targeting women who stayed home with children while their husbands or boyfriends were at work. The stakes grew significantly higher, as the police now believed they were looking for a dangerous stranger. Most of the women had turned the man away, but one of them, a realtor herself, had not been afraid to let him in. She quickly regretted her decision. The man seemed nervous, didn't turn on lights, and avoided opening doors as if he wasn't particularly interested in the house. Then he went upstairs and kept calling her to join him, asking various questions. The woman realized he was trying to lure her into her own bedroom. She shouted her answers from downstairs, steadfastly refusing to go up. Eventually, the stranger left, but he gave her his name, Walter Miller, and a phone number. While the woman helped create a composite sketch, the police checked the name in their databases. The database search revealed 2 Walter Millers, but both were far too old to be the suspect. A check of the phone number, however, provided a more interesting lead. The phone actually belonged to a man named Matt Sapowski, who had a record of domestic violence and drug charges. Detectives went to Matt's home, confident they had found their suspect, but discovered a man who was practically immobile. Sometime before the murder, Matt had been in a car accident, leaving him incapacitated and physically incapable of killing Diane. Fortunately, the work on the composite sketch paid off. 10 minutes after it was shown on TV, a woman called to report that the man had visited her home as well. This had happened 6 months earlier, and he had been very insistent about entering. She refused and he left, but he returned a few months later. Once again, the woman refused to let him in without a realtor, which enraged him. The stranger yelled at her, but she stood her ground. Frightened by the incident, the woman grabbed a pen and paper after he left and wrote down the license plate number of his car. The car was registered to 37-year-old Anthony Russo. At first glance, Russo didn't look like a suspect. A married father of 2, he played in a Christian music band and performed at church. However, this same Tony Russo had a history of multiple assaults on women whom he had attempted to strangle. He had been sentenced to 20 years for one of these incidents, but was released early after serving only 8 years. Detectives went to speak with Russo. Unsurprisingly, he didn't live on a ranch, but in a small, modest house outside Austin. He agreed to come in for questioning, and while he was at the station, the police conducted a search of his home. They found nothing to link him to Diane's murder. At the station, Russo explained that on Thursday at 4 p.m., he had driven to Austin to visit a Christian radio station to promote his band. He said he knocked, but no one answered, so he left. Russo denied looking at new houses and didn't react when shown Diane's photo. The police had no choice but to release him. However, when they spoke to the radio station manager, he said he knew Russo but hadn't seen him that day. Moreover, considering the approaching tornado, it would have been impossible to miss a visitor. According to protocol, upon hearing a tornado warning, everyone in the building was required to go to the lobby and open the doors to equalize the internal pressure. The entrance was clearly visible, and if anyone had approached the radio station, they would have been noticed. So, Russo lied, and the police were able to detain him. It was a minor offense, but it allowed the police to proceed with the case without fearing that he might attack someone else, and they got lucky. Another young mother called the police and stated that she might have evidence against the suspect. When her husband was at work, a man knocked on her door with a flyer about selling her house. He asked if he could come in, and she let him. He was polite, asking about the dog, security systems, and children. They walked through the house, and when they entered the bedroom, he suddenly turned toward her. In an instant, he transformed from a person into a monster. His eyes gave him away. The woman was certain he was preparing to attack her when the baby monitor emitted the sound of a child crying. The woman abruptly turned and rushed to her child. The stranger followed her, but seeing the baby in her arms, he bolted, leaving behind an important piece of evidence. Acting on instinct, the woman put the flyer in a drawer, and when she saw the police sketch, she called the authorities. Tony Russo claimed he never scouted any houses and that his fingerprints wouldn't appear anywhere. But laboratory analysis proved otherwise. The flyer bore 4 fingerprints belonging to Tony Russo, and this young mother could have been his first victim. The women whom Russo had approached under the pretense of viewing real estate identified him. His phone's ping connected him to the area near Diane's house. Additionally, a towel found in her home contained several hairs. While they lacked roots, making a 100% definitive DNA analysis impossible, partial DNA analysis matched Russo's DNA. However, the suspect didn't confess to anything, and prosecutors feared that this evidence might not be enough for a conviction. Then investigators had an idea. They discovered Russo had been searching for homes for sale on the internet. Examining his computer revealed far more than they had expected. They established Russo's motive. As it turned out, he frequented some rather disturbing websites. Specifically, he had a paid subscription to a highly specific website showcasing the realization of men's darkest erotic fantasies. The last video he watched on the site depicted a man, under the guise of purchasing real estate, entering a woman's house and strangling her, deriving intimate pleasure from the act of killing. The man then stole her jewelry, staging the murder as a botched robbery. At Anthony Russo's trial, the prosecutor gave an emotional account of what likely happened that day. Russo, he argued, first visited Diane on Thursday morning, telling her he would return later with his wife. Indeed, he returned during the storm, bringing everything he needed for the attack. Diane, of course, let him in and offered him a towel to dry his hair. Suddenly, he attacked her from behind and bound her with zip ties so she couldn't fight back. His victim must have waited in terror as he prepared his murder weapon, some type of rope or similar object. Then he strangled her. Raising his hands as if holding someone by the neck, the prosecutor asked the jury to vividly imagine what had happened that day. Tied up, Diane couldn't fight back, couldn't scratch his hands or defend herself. He held her for at least 2.5 to 3 minutes, watching as life left her body with each passing second. Imagine how long that took and what she must have felt in those moments. The jurors imagined this horrifying scene and found Anthony Russo guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole until he is 93 years old. All his appeals were unsuccessful, and he continues to serve his sentence in prison. It is heartbreaking to realize that Diane's openness, friendliness, and kindness led to such a tragic outcome. However, it is truly admirable how, in this case, several women, strangers to one another, but united by their encounters with a predator scouting for his next victim, came together to prevent him from harming anyone else. If not for the women who identified him, recorded his license plate, and preserved the flyer, the case might never have been solved. And if Russo had gotten away with this crime, he would almost certainly have tried again and again, driven now by the thirst to kill.